On today's episode of Faith and Focus, I want to talk about an article I read online about, it's called, It's Time to End the Insanity of the Typical Youth Ministry. And I want to talk about this article about how youth ministry seems to be pretty ineffectual. We seem to be losing our influence in the church with young people. So I want to talk about that and kind of tie that in with just some thoughts I've been having coming out of working at camp this past week, and then some stuff I've been listening to and reading and just thinking about in terms of youth ministry and ministering to young people in the church. So that's what we'll be talking about on this episode. Well, this past week I was at Camp Niati, which is a camp that is run by my pastor. For 1 week out of the summer, we rent a camp in northern Michigan, and it's a camp for young kids to come and have a good time, but hear the gospel and just be loved by Christians, to come and work at a camp and entertain these kids and hopefully lead them to the Lord. And we had a couple kids this week accept Christ, and even a couple staff members, so that was exciting. But this is a camp that my pastor has run for, probably close to 15, 20 years now. And I've been a part of as a camper and then as a helper coming up in the church. And several people from our church go and help, and people from other churches go and help. And it's usually just a very good week of refreshment. Kind of recharges people. I mean, even though it's physically, anyone who's worked with youth and worked in camp ministry, it's exhausting. You come back typically more tired than you went in. Actually, when I took time off work, I put in for vacation time, and my boss had kind of said, have a good time and have a good vacation or whatever. And I said, yeah, I end up being more tired than I would be if I was just here working. You feel like you're just getting run ragged by these kids going, 12, 15 hours a day. So, and it's all good, obviously. The fruit that comes out of it is amazing. And I know our camp's not unique in that regard. So obviously camp ministry, youth ministry, working with young kids has been in my mind in the lead up to this. And then over that week, and then since camp got over with, just read a couple articles, listened to some stuff, was reading some stuff about youth ministry, and just kind of wanted to put some of my thoughts into the podcast about youth ministry and some of the pitfalls I think that we fall into, maybe some ways that we can avoid them, and maybe throw out some ideas and kind of mull over some ideas of things that should change with youth ministry. And just at the outset, I think, and I've did a podcast about this before, about, some of the problems that the church faces just in general, when the church kind of operates like a business, treats people like consumers, and tries to entertain them rather than discipling them and growing them in Christ. There just seems to be a pressure to run a church like a business. And so I think the youth ministry, a lot of the problems that might become apparent with youth ministry, when you really think about, what's going on, why are we losing so many kids to the world system and can't seem to hold it together in the church. A lot of the problems, I think, are just because youth ministries will function under that same umbrella of operating like a business. And that's kind of what this article brings out. As I mentioned, the title is called "It's Time to End the Insanity of Typical Youth Ministry." And so I'll just read this and kind of make some comments on it. It's not a super long article, but It starts out said someone has once said insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. This is true in life. This is true in youth ministry. For the last 50 years, youth ministry has pretty much stayed the same. We do the same kinds of meetings we've always done, midweek, Sunday morning, etc. Do the same kind of things in those meetings. We play games, sing songs, give announcements, teach a lesson, eat snacks, etc. In addition to these same old weekly meetings, we do the same kinds of annual events, winter retreats, summer camp, special events, where the same things happen. We do the same thing over and over again, week after week, month after month, year after year, and expect different results. But for the most part, the results are the same and extremely disheartening. So, just as a comment, I think that's probably true. And again, I think that's something that just plagues the church in general is I think the church tends to be typically conservative, and I don't necessarily mean politically conservative. I just mean as like a worldview of trying to preserve things from the past, and that's a good thing, obviously, because we want to preserve the teachings of Christ, the message of the gospel, the truths of Scripture, which are obviously all from the past, and we want to hold on to those. So that naturally attracts conservative thinking people who are not forging new paths as far as, new orthodoxy and new ways of thinking and new doctrine. That's when you start to get into that kind of new stuff in the church, you kind of get like this emergent church culture that is much more reflective of our culture and the new trends in our culture and society, and the church seems to reflect that. That's why those things seem to be the more progressive liberal type, but the conservative-minded people tend to want to focus backwards. Well, it's very hard, I think, for us as people to draw a distinction between our minds, or in our minds between, conserving the things that need to be conserved, like the gospel, doctrine, truth, while changing with the times and leaving behind old kind of calcified traditions and as the illustration that Jesus uses, like the wineskins, that holds the wine. The wine is the good stuff, the truth of the gospel, the thing that we want to carry forward. The wineskin would be the container with which we hold it in. The wine doesn't change, but the wineskins might need to be updated. So, because we tend to be conservative type people, we tend to do the same things over and over and over again. And this is true in church. I remember reading Howard Hendricks once said he was asked to consult at a church that was kind of stagnating, dying, and so he came in and saw, the church, and it's very old-timey, old hymns, and the pews, and it was all very old school. And he said, well, my advice is to put a fence around this building, charge admission, and tell people that this is what church looked like in 1952. Because nothing had changed. They were still doing the same things over and over and over again. So that's obviously a problem with the church, is knowing when to update, when to change. Even what we call like contemporary Christian music is typically not, in many churches we're singing songs that are 20 years old. And they sound 20 years old. They're not contemporary. They're not, they don't sound like what, young people are listening to nowadays. And I'm not saying that it has to, but, there's nothing contemporary necessarily about it. So that's a problem, I think, that just plagues the church, but it obviously affects youth ministry too. So the article goes on, according to one massive research project from greatopportunity.org, we are losing 1 million Christian teenagers per year and will continue to do so for the next 35 years if something doesn't drastically change. These teenagers aren't just leaving their churches, they're leaving their faith completely, right? So this, if you're a parent, this is a struggle with kids and your friends of your kids. We see this in churches. We see this in people that we know. Kids just grow up and they just want nothing to do with the Lord. So it's very, very widespread. It says, he continues on, to keep doing what we're doing is insanity. Something must radically change. So what's the solution? Is it to dump the whole concept of youth ministry? No. We will never reach the next generation if we stop focusing on reaching and discipling Gen Z. It's not time to stop doing youth ministry. It's time to start doing it. It's time to stop doing it the way we are currently doing it. It's time to do what Jesus did and reach, train, and mobilize his mostly teenage disciples. So I don't know where this author gets the idea that most of the teenagers where the disciples were teenagers. I mean, I don't know where he gets that from. Maybe I'm missing something, but there doesn't seem to be any indication in the Gospels that they were teenagers. Yeah, I have no idea what that means. But the point being, when you look at kind of what he says we should do, it's it's no different than what every church should be doing. It's just basic stuff without all of the fluff. What I think that the problem is in this article is hitting on is what we've been doing for the past 50 years is all of this fluff that we've added on. All of these programs, all of the music and the entertainment and the games, all of this stuff to entertain the kids, to get kids to come to these youth group things. And we've abandoned the principle of making disciples and training disciples and raising up mature believers. That's just the problem, or a problem with the church in general, right? Church services just entertain people and view them as consumers. So what can we do to get people in? We'll give them lunch, we'll give them coffee, we'll give them nice music, we'll give them comfy chairs, we'll give them a sermon that's not too long with some funny jokes and relatable content, and we'll just try to entertain them. And the point of what we're supposed to be doing in the church of making disciples has been set on the back burner. I don't think it's a conscious choice. It's just when you're busy doing everything else, that stuff seems to fall away. So he does say that one thing that we should do in youth ministry is, like Jesus, he prayed with unparalleled wisdom on who to focus on. And he references Mark 3:13. So this is probably a really good idea. Again, in any level of ministry in the church, no matter whether you're a pastor or just a lay person going to church, is praying with unparalleled wisdom on who to focus on. So we should all be we should all be discipling people. But I don't think that means we just, kind of shotgun blast and just, pick random, kind of just throw the offer out there to everybody, and whoever might say, okay, yeah, and then just grab them and start reading the Bible to them and try to teach them, and, to really take some time. This is something that I think it's Koshy and Rosenberg in their book, The Invested Life, talk about is praying to God. God, who do you have for me to disciple? And letting God connect you with the person he wants you to disciple, because he's got people out there that fit maybe your teaching style, your relationship, your skill set. He just is a good matchmaker that way. So we need to be doing that with teenage kids. We need to be praying about, God, okay, who do you have for us? Who should we be discipling, and how should we be discipling them? And it says he invested in the few and mobilized them for mission. So that's the commissioning of the 12 and the 70 and stuff. It says he trained them along the way. Of course, this would be the discipleship, the training aspect of it. Teaching them the word, teaching them how to do ministry. With Jesus, he's teaching them, how to pray. He's showing them how to cast out demons. And that's a huge part of discipleship, is just modeling what the Christian life looks like. So, one of the things with youth ministry that I think gets lost, because we think everything has to happen at the event, right? Everything becomes about that event. The at church, Wednesday night, whatever day youth group happens to be, everything, all the energy goes into that. And then we never see them again for the rest of the week, just like a pastor might never see anyone else in their church throughout the week except on Sunday. We never see these kids. And so you can never really model what the Christian life looks like. Whereas if people that are working with youth in their church are having them in their home. Now, I know this was true of me. I spent a lot of time at my pastor's house, and we spent time, having dinner. I would eat dinner with them, and we would have discussions just about whatever. Sometimes it was the Bible. Sometimes it was just regular stuff, but the Bible was informing it. I got to see my pastor and his wife arguing and fighting and yelling at the kids, and the kids being disrespectful, and how you handle all that stuff. And, I get to see it all. And it was just, this is what life is like, and here's how a family of people trying to honor God, here's what they do. So you lose that stuff if you are only doing youth group for a couple hours at the church. It's just so sterile and so institutionalized. It's not organic. So he offered salvation as a free gift to everyone. This is from the article, but required 100% commitment to be a part of his leadership team. So that's a huge part, right? Okay. So we might have the group that's coming. So we're gonna offer salvation freely to everybody. But the commitment part, the somebody who's wanting to live for the Lord and they're serious. That's gonna probably be a good indicator, right, of who to hone in on and focus on for discipleship and mentoring. It's because they're committed. So, he references Luke 14:15 through 35. In this passage is Jesus inviting everyone to the table. But then, you got people saying, oh, I just got married. I got to go back and, I got to go, bury my father, all this kind of stuff, these excuses that people have. And man, that really helps to self-select. If you've got a young kid who comes to youth group, once a couple times a month, but, he's committed to his sports because he needs to get a scholarship to go to college and he's going to be off going to college to play, whatever sports at the college. So, he's dedicated. I knew people every season, every time there was a sport going on at their school, they were involved in that. And so they'd have practices all the time, every night of the week. Every once in a while they'd be able to come to youth group, whatever. It's like, that lets you know that person's committed to something else other than the things of the Lord. Now, you can offer the gospel to them freely, but when it comes to discipleship, when it comes to mentoring, when it comes to training young people to be mature in the faith and then be disciple makers of their own, you're going to want to hone in on the people who are saying, hey, I'm committed to the Lord. I like sports as much as the next guy, but you know what? Eventually sports are going to, die off. I'm going to be too old to play sports, whatever, I'm going to graduate from college and it's going to be done. Like, it's not going to matter. So you want to be focused on the people who are committed. So, and then lastly, he says he had a strategy of disciple multiplication that is as relevant now as ever. He says, and so much more. So what if we this is still from the article, what if we let the youth ministry philosophy of Jesus drive our youth ministry model? What if we focus on building a strong leadership team, aka the disciples, who are all in to lead the way for spiritual growth and gospel advancement for the other teens in our youth groups? What if we stopped catering to the apathetic kids to try to get them to like us and enjoy youth group and start really making and multiplying disciples? So again, I agree with, all of that. I think it's great. I think it needs to be modeled in youth group, just like it is in, the church on a broader level. I think the problems plaguing youth groups plague the church broadly. And I want to play a clip. This is one of the things I was listening to that I thought was good. This is from Dwell Community Church down in Columbus, Ohio. It's a church I've followed for quite a long time. This is from one of their episodes called The History of Dwell Community Church, Part 3. They're talking with Dennis McCallum and Gary DeLashmet, two of the founding pastors it was Xenos Christian Fellowship. Now it's Dwell Community Church. And, they're in their 70s now, and so they're talking about the history. And this little bit here is them talking about when they realized in the 90s that they need to transition to focusing on the youth, middle school, high school, college age. And in their church now, it's got thousands, 3,000 solid believers who are, being discipled in, middle school, high school, and college. It's a large chunk of their church. And so you kind of listen to their strategy as they talk about it here.
And both of you guys were involved with that move, right, of focusing more on young people. That seems like maybe an unusual thing to have your top leaders, your senior pastors focus on young people. In a lot of churches, it seems like the youth pastor or whatever is more of a secondary role or an entry-level role. How do you compare that with what other churches do when it comes to focusing on young people?
In my case, I got to do both. I got to continue to teach the central teachings for adults and teach classes for adults. But then in our home church, we focused on younger people. And We had a good 10 to 13 year run there working with people who were in college or just out of college. So I felt like it was the best of both worlds.
I've never understood the church's disinterest in student ministry.
Yeah.
They are kind of a nuisance at times, maybe some rough behavior, and they don't give. So maybe that has something to do with it. But our view has always been that that's the future, and that is the most strategic demographic to go after.
Yeah, you get the chance to work with people before they've made all the big decisions. And so they have a chance to make the big decisions about marriage and what they're going to do job-wise and all that the right way.
So you heard in there kind of what they talked about as they were making the decision to transfer kind of an emphasis on youth ministry, young people. And the way they viewed it was, hey, this is not something that we should just, give to one of our, lower level workers. This needs to be the top leadership. So them as the head pastors, they stepped into that role to really head this up. And the rationale was because this is the future, right? I mean, in that episode, they talked about how now that they've stepped aside as lead pastors, a couple of the people that came up through that ministry at that time are people now leading the church. And so they realized, hey, listen, we're going to have to work ourselves out of a job, at some point. So we need to start investing now and finding now, who God has for this work and for this ministry. So I think part of the problem with youth ministry is, like they said, it kind of kids get viewed as nuisances. That was said. They don't give money, so they're not, contributing. They're really a drain on resources. Again, there's nothing negative about kids. I mean, that's true in families, right? They're not contributing anything. They're just a drain on resources. So they're not contributing anything financially. So the lead pastor of churches probably just views them that way, whatever, like, we got to deal with it because they're here, we want to have their parents maybe or whatever, but we'll just give this to a youth pastor, some guy right out of college. And, and the youth pastor typically is, it's training for moving up into associate pastor and then lead pastor. So, and that's kind of the other problem, right? Is it sort of communicates to young kids, and I'm not saying that all youth pastors are this way, and I think most probably aren't, but what it kind of communicates is like, I'm here as a stepping stone. This is a job for me, and I get paid for it, but, I'll move away once I, can move into a higher paying associate pastorate job or a lead pastorate job. So it kind of creates a chill over the whole thing. And this is true. Again, this is just a problem of the church in general, is pastors, the same thing. They might be a pastor of a mid-sized church, but, if they get an opportunity to move to another church, bigger pay, they're going to take it. It just kind of puts a chill over the whole congregation. There's kind of a distance, and like suspicion with leadership, and especially with young kids. They know if you're not sincere. They can perceive that, and if you love them, man, they'll go to bat for you. But if they can sense that you're duplicitous, that you're not really, if you don't have the purest of motives, they don't care. And something we kind of experienced, it kind of really came to light at camp this week. We run a small camp. It's a very shoestring budget. It's run by some in-faith missionaries, and what they raise for support, that's what they're able to do. So it's a small camp. Doesn't have all the, bells and whistles of, a big camp. But, there's no zip line racing across the camp through the tree line or anything. But the kids all seem to love it. And one of the things that is nice about the camp is it's low cost, So, whereas a week camp, a nicer camp is, $1,000, a couple $1,000 or whatever. And our camp's like $100 for the whole week. So it's very inexpensive, and we intentionally try to keep it that way. Then can attract a certain demographic of people who can't afford to send their kids to a more expensive camp, and that's okay. This is the audience we're trying to reach, and the people that we're trying to reach. But these kids are really insightful. They can tell, and the if you care about them, and the thing is about with the camp that we work at, because it's all the staff is all volunteers. We're all coming there on our dime. We're taking time off of work or whatever. So the staff there, they wouldn't be doing it if they didn't care about the kids. And I think the kids know that. It kind of self-selects the kind of people that we'd have working with the kids. So ones who really care about the kids. So the kids can kind of see that. And what's amazing is, we've had kids, even this week, had gone to camps where they have all of the, amenities and all this great stuff, and they come to our camp and we kind of think, oh man, like, are they gonna enjoy it as much? Are they really gonna get anything out of it? And some of them said, like, this camp is better than any camp I've been to. And I really honestly think, because, well, again, we've got hopefully staff that cares about these kids and the kids can tell, but one of the problems, and this is not true of youth ministry, it's not just true of camp ministry, it's true in the church as well, that when you've got all of the stuff, there is an easier ability. You're more prone to rest on those things, the human ingenuity and the human skills and all these programs. You can rely on those things, and you don't necessarily have to rely on the Holy Spirit. And there's that temptation, and that trap that we can fall into. Everything's down to a science. We had one counselor this week that said she'd worked at another camp that it was basically like it was regimented, like it was scheduled, because they're all paid staff. It's a job. This is a really scheduled thing. So you're having a really good conversation with a kid's really pouring out his or her heart, and you can tell, man, the Lord seems like they're working. Well, now it hits 6:02. You got to be at the waterfront now. Cut that conversation short. At our camp, we have that freedom to sense of if the Spirit's working in somebody, we can just be like, okay, the other kids can go. I'm gonna hold back and really engage with this kid, and they can tell that they can sense that they're being led. So that's one of the highlights that I've noticed at camp this past week, and I think that same spirit needs to be carried over into youth ministry in general. One of the problems with youth ministry is we're working with kids, especially kids now. They're just so cynical and they're so jaded. A lot of problems that these kids are facing, and they want people who just care about them. I think that's what they want. And if we fall into this pattern of just viewing them as commodities, viewing them as numbers, viewing them as consumers to consume the product that we have to offer, man, they're not going to appreciate that. And of course, they're not going to have any loyalty to the gospel message, right? They're going to be entertained for a little bit, and they're going to get into college and be entertained by other things, more unsavory things. So that's going to be a problem that's just going to keep being perpetuated if we keep doing the same things the same way. So I think stripping it down, I have no problem with every week having the youth ministry where it's kind of the more stripped down, or more laid back kind of atmosphere. We're trying to kind of gather the crowd, so to speak, like they did in the book of Acts. They heal somebody who's born blind or something, gather the crowd, preach the gospel, whatever. Okay, we can have those kinds of meetings, or we can gather crowds, offer the gospel, but then we need to focus in on and hone in on, okay, what kids are really resonating, which kids really want to grow in the Lord, who really has the interest and the commitment to go all the way, and then you can hone in on them and then develop the discipleship plan, working with them, discipling them. And of course, you got to do wisdom. Obviously, these are minors we're talking about. You can't, have a kid at your house. You can't be picking kids up and taking them to coffee shops without their parents' permission. You have to be wise, probably doing it in groups, having co-leaders, all that kind of stuff. But then also having, churches, head pastors, they need to get involved in this. High-level leadership needs to make it a priority that these kids are not a nuisance. They are the future of the church, and that they're going to invest energy And it as well. Like I said, that was my experience at my church. I was at my pastor's house all the time. I was always welcome there. And a lot of time investment and financial investment. The amount of couches we destroyed by sleeping on them and wrestling on them, and carpets we stained, and things we broke at their house. They'd probably be retired at this point if they didn't have to replace all that stuff. So, it's going to cost, and we have to be willing to pay that cost. That's part of the commitment that we have as the adults and the mature believers. We don't expect high-level maturity from young people, from immature people. That's what we offer as the adults in the room. So I think time to end the insanity of typical youth ministry. Let's end it all in the church. We're done ministering that way. We're going to strip it down, focus on discipleship with individuals, and see the church explode the way that it did in the early church, because we're not entertaining people anymore. We're looking for committed followers of Christ, and that includes young people, middle-aged, high school age, before they get into college, get tied down to a career that entangles them with the worries and cares of this world, and they get into all the problems of adulthood. Oftentimes in the church we're dealing reactively with problems that people have gotten themselves into as young adults. Well, with youth ministry, invest the time, invest the energy, and hopefully we can prevent that stuff before it happens. So that's this episode for this week, talking about youth ministry, but just talking about church ministry in general, focusing on discipleship. I'll include a couple links to this article, to that podcast episode that was in here, and a couple good books on discipleship. And you can check them out and study up, get trained, and get out there and make some disciples. Have a good one.
While Faith in Focus is a ministry of In Faith, the views and opinions expressed in this podcast don't necessarily reflect the views and opinions of In Faith as a mission. If you like what you heard on this episode, why don't you become a monthly supporter of the ministry? It really helps me out. $10 a month, or whatever the Lord lays on your heart. So if you're interested in becoming a partner, you can text the word discipleship to 41444, or head over to infaith.org/Dennis-Southerby. And if you have any questions or topics that you would like me to address on a future episode of Faith in Focus, why don't you shoot me an email? You can email me at dennissoutherby@infaith.org. Just put in the subject line, question for Faith in Focus, or something like that. So I can see it, know that it's from you, and know that it's an issue that you would like me to address.